And folks, this is Book Talk with Corbin. I'm your host, and we have our friend, our good friend of this show, Sister Star Parker, great author and intellectual and scholar. Wanted to bring her on originally to talk about some things about what direction she believes that we should be going as patriots in this country. But just before we started this recording, I was just saying to her, man, so many other things have been hitting the news lately. So I just wanted to briefly, very quickly, just go over some of those things and get her thoughts on them. Maybe we can start here with, we had mentioned this Black Lives Matter person who had bought this house. And I think people are complaining about it, but I think my initial reaction is pretty much yours. Hey, if she didn't steal the money, I mean, it's her right, being in the United States of America, to buy property.
Yeah, I think it's the hypocrisy that some people are upset about, that the folks that scream the loudest for collectivism and redistribution and reparations then go out and partake in the free market. And that's why it becomes news. But as a consumer, as a patriot, as an American, one of the beauties of our free country is private property. That is the essence and core of remaining free. You want a limited role of government, and you want to be able to purchase. You want to be able to own. And so that's why I have very little to say about whether she should have or should not have gone out and bought a whole bunch of houses, even though she's in the spotlight as leading the Black Lives Matters movement today. So I think that's why people are like, what? I thought that you guys didn't like capitalism, and now you're partaking in capitalism. And I don't know how many people that have been giving them money, and then or the corporations that have been shaken down for money are giving them money for them then to make high salaries for themselves to then go out and be able to buy that kind of property. So I think that that's the main reason that it's in the news.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And also just not to change the subject, but more and more African scholars are talking about the absolute importance of upholding property rights in African nations. That's that lack has really retarded economic development in some of the African nations.
Right. I think one of the beautiful things that we have today in some of the younger African countries is this new leadership that are expressing, as you're pointing out, that they don't want foreign aid, they want free trade. And so they're learning the mechanics of economics. They're putting in place structures similar to what we have, which is freedom of expression, our First Amendment freedom, mostly Christianity, and then our capitalism, and then having a constitution, a rule of law. So you're exactly right. I'm intrigued by them, especially the new president of Rwanda. When he first said it, I thought, wow. He said, no, I want free trade. I don't need your money. I want to find out how to do this ourselves. And then they get involved in making widgets to grow. So that's one of the beauties of the internet and this younger energy. It's unfortunate, as you know, that lure towards socialism, that people can get caught up in it, but it is such a opposition, if you will, to capitalism and to real freedom. And so it's interesting to see so many youth saying that, wow, this might be a good idea to get into socialism, but yet for their own lives, they're acting like a bunch of capitalists. They're going out and getting as much as they can. They want their own businesses. Even in our own country, in the African American community, some of the rhetoric that you hear from leadership is so different from what the people say that they desire, which is to put their money on their table so that they can go out and explore some of the fruit of their labor.
Yeah, and that last point you made is very important. It's that disparaging gap there between what the so-called leadership is saying and what the grassroots are saying.
Yeah.
And obviously that's something you pick up a lot because of the type of work you do, urbancure.org, the type of work that you do. I guess you just sort of see that more than your average person, I guess you might say.
Well, it's unfortunate, though, that when you're in a community that you're only hearing one side of the story and that's your regular diet, you actually start to believe it. So while in your heart you may desire one thing, in your head you're saying something differently, you're acting differently. And so you have a whole lot in the African American community who vote against their interests, their economic interests and their moral interests, simply because they bought that lie that collectivism, socialism, and frankly, secularism are good ideas. And it's mostly because of what they're feeding on. All you hear all day continuously is that there's some boogeyman out there that's going to have a racist, wand against you. Then after a while, you live your life in fear, thinking that you need a sugar daddy. And that's what's happened mostly in our harder hit communities today. And it's unfortunate because, as you pointed out, in their heart, they don't want that stuff. They want more. Otherwise, why, when they riot, do they go after the good stores? When they Washington, D.C. This time they didn't tear up their own neighborhood. They went to Gucci and they went to Louis Vuitton. So, and that's where you see a whole lot of Black money being spent with these designers. So it is a very interesting, perplex, or I guess you could say great irony.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And let's touch upon a little bit about this whole Georgia bill. I was astounded at that. And a lot of people have been saying to me, oh my God, this is Jim Crow on steroids and suppressing Black voters. What are some of your thoughts on that whole Georgia bill?
I think that language has meaning, and I think that the President Biden was totally irresponsible to interject Jim Crow, especially a man of his age, because he lived through that era. And it's unfortunate because you have now half of our society who don't even know what Jim Crow is. They've never lived through it. We're 3 generations away from it. So all they've heard are the little stories that are being told from the hard left to keep them living lives of fear and oppression. And unfortunately, even in our public schools, we've rewritten the history of what that looked like. That was such an ugly stain on our history, a shameful period of time, that to just interject it any and every time at a whim because you're not getting your way is very unfortunate to our ancestors, because they had to endure that lash. They had to endure the Jim Crow of the South. And it wasn't even all through the country. So you have a whole lot of people don't even know what they're talking about. And so I suppose just like infrastructure, they're rewriting what it actually means. They're rewriting what Jim Crow means. For a state like Georgia to tighten its ability to not only allow for more voting, but also voting of integrity, for them to now be considered the new Jim Crow, this is absurd. And this is very, very disingenuous of the left to interject such a horrible part of our history to make a point that most Americans don't even want. Most Americans want their vote to count, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on and regardless of what their ethnicity is. They want their vote to count. And the only way that your vote is going to count, especially with so much mobility in our country, is if the governments are on a regular basis making sure that their voting rolls are accurate. And when you start tightening, especially after the pandemic, when you start to say, well, okay, we've got to now look at our voting and make sure, especially with some of what we were hearing last time, 2 weeks before the election, it was Congressman Claiborne that was saying, if the Democrats lose, it's because there was cheating and suppression. So both sides now are saying that we must have integrity in our voting. So let's just do this without all the stimulation of accusations of something that's history and a very shameful part of our history. We don't need all of the hyperbole. We don't need to hear constantly about racism every time liberals don't get their way. It's a disservice to my ancestors.
And how are you sort of seeing this the way the Major League Baseball, and I want to say Coca-Cola and Delta, the way they've sort of responded?
On Delta, because, and I know that there was a push and some of the patriots are saying we need a boycott. If you start boycotting, we're going to live like the Amish, because you're not going to be able to boycott yourself out of existence in this country. No, what you ought to do is start buying up stock in these companies and then your first sentences is as a shareholder. So yes, I wrote Delta in my column. And so Mr. Bastian, look, you got a great story. Yes, you came back to Delta, because he had gotten fired or whatever. He had problems there before and under the last leadership. I'm a Delta diamond. I'm a million miler. I work very hard because I like Delta. I think it's an incredible airline. other airlines I've experienced, but Delta does it well. I'm not going to boycott Delta, but I am going to encourage Mr. Bastian to stay out of political discussions. Now, he's embraced this whole Black Lives Matters, critical race theory stuff. I understand what these companies think that they have to do to be socially responsible to the hard left, but it's about time that the right starts pushing back and say, no, we're stockholders too. We're consumers too. No, we are not going to just take our ball and bat and go home every time that you're pressured to go for the socially correct, politically correct jargon of the left. No, we are going to exercise our right to exist. And frankly, since the numbers are so close, we're talking half the country voted for Donald Trump. Okay, so half the country is not afraid to put a Republican in charge. And we're talking about a Republican-led state. What happened in Georgia was our democracy. People voted for elected officials. The elected officials passed the bill and the governor signed it. You don't like that? Then change your leadership. All of Delta's employees there in Atlanta can do whatever they want to with their vote, but it's none of Delta's business to go out there and offend half of its clients simply because they feel pressure from the left. Now, Coca-Cola, I don't drink it anyway, so I have very, very little opinion about them.
Okay. And baseball, you not a baseball fan? You're not?
No, baseball, I think that the commissioner should get up and say, I made a big mistake. It might be a little late for him to do that, but boy, did he step in, especially taking the baseball, that particular all-star from Atlanta, black town to a white town. This is not looking good for baseball right now, especially with baseball's history. And it's going to be a very, very difficult journey to get to July with one city losing $100 million and you're taking it to another city, $100 million and with this racial dynamic and in the name of racial equity. This is why the corporate should not buy the jargon of the left to say that America is systemically racist. It is not, and it's not their business whether it was or is not. Their business is to serve up a product that consumers will desire enough that they can not only hire a lot of people and make a whole lot of money, but money also for their shareholders. So my advice is let's not boycott. Let's go buy stock. Let's work our way up to the boards of these corporations so that conservatives can decide what the company is going to get engaged in and not.
Yes, I think they call that stockholder activism. I know they.
I think it's just about making money too, but they do allow you to vote. I mean, I remember when I was in talk radio for years for ABC, I was a member of AFTRA, and then one day SAG bought AFTRA. They merged, so it made me a member of SAG, and they invited me to vote. I could vote for the AP president. I could vote for the SAG president, and this is make all entertainment decisions. So actually, if conservatives really wanted to be activists and instead of just complaining all day about what's happening in the culture, go take over the culture. If all the radio hosts join SAG, I know that we're not like unions, but hey, the media world is controlled by union. In fact, SAG-AFTRA is in AFL-CIO. It's all one big happy union, but it's also all of the mainstream media. So if all the radio hosts join SAG overnight, guess what? You get to decide who's in charge of AP because you get to vote.
Wow. Wow.
Hey, we can do it in the political realm. Let's do it in the media realm too. Let's do it in the news realm too. It's better than I'm quitting my subscription. I'm quitting. We're going to quit ourselves out of society. And frankly, that's what the left really wants. The devil would love to wreak havoc over this society. He would love to say that this is mine, but it's not his. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So we've got to fight for that space, especially in a free country like our own. Otherwise, we're going to live the persecuted church underground, just talking to each other. That is just not healthy for ourselves, not healthy for our children, our grandchildren. But you know who's most, my heart, and who's most hit hardest by this, if we leaving it up to the devil to control our society, are the most vulnerable and the poor, the people that need our voice the most, the ones that just have no clue about life. Everything in their life is broken, from their family to their community. No, they need Christianity to stay alive and thriving. And therefore, we have to engage the public square. We've got to engage the culture, which also means we've got to engage capitalism and business and take over.
Wow. Sis, what are some other things you think that we should do as patriots, as conservatives? Because what you just said is very powerful. And I'm very familiar with it because of my prior political activities. But what are some other things you think we need to do, other than, specific things, other than, as you say, engage the culture?
Well, I think it's fundamentally in what we might have called in years gone by, the Republican platform, conservatism. First is you adopt eternal truths. You believe in God. First thing we have to do is say, why do we believe what we believe? Once you say tradition, then that means that choice has meaning. And so therefore you have energy to fight, to say what's right, what's wrong. The first chapter in the Bible is about good and evil. And in fact, in my column this week, I'm talking about Reagan's speech to the National Evangelical Association about good and evil. That's how he was able to bring down that wall. When you think about the next step, after tradition, you've got to embrace a limited role of government. We have to start saying no to government. Today, 60% of Americans get more from government than they put in. So that means we're complicit. Those that say they're conservative, those that say that they're patriots, they want the big nanny state, but just on their issues. No, we've got to say no. This is yours, that's mine. That's what the scripture talks about. That's what God said in the very first chapter of Genesis. It was a discussion about property rights. That belongs to me, that one tree, everything else is yours. Render to Caesar what Caesar's, to God what's God. So we have to define the role of government. It's to protect our interests, not to plunder us, not to redistribute us, but to protect our interests. The third thing is we have to embrace free markets. We should be able to buy and sell. We shouldn't buy into these ideas of unions that someone else should determine how much money you make. No, that's between you and who's hiring you. And you put your talent on the table and that person will purchase your talent. That's why you start seeing growth. Whenever there's growth in your economy, wages rise on their own because you got to buy talent. And then, of course, we want to pluribus unum. I think that that's something that individually as patriots, we should start working on again, that we've been balkanized enough by the left. We don't want to start doing that on the right ourselves, is to start saying, okay, the people groups are getting too small. No, the beauty of America is all of us. Anyone from any background can partake in the interests of our society, which is free. And it can only stay free if we limit the role of government. So those are the four things that I would say we as patriots need to start doing, not just on a national level, but also on a local level, a very local level, with our city councils, with our school boards, with our mayors, with our county directors, with our state directors, and then, of course, here in Washington.
Sis, you had mentioned that you're writing some articles. Where can we go to read these articles?
Well, my syndicated column, of course, is through Creators, so it's all over the country. But specifically, if somebody goes to urbancure.org and they sign up, I will email it to them. And I would prefer that. I would love to build my email list. So if they go to urbancure.org and sign up for it, then every single week they'll get my syndicated column.
Okay. And let's say, I know a couple of pastors here in Louisville. Should I urge them to contact you? If they were to contact you, what would you want to hear from them? How could you work with them?
Well, I would love to, because what we do here at CURE is promote market-based solutions to fight poverty. So what our mission is to fight poverty, to restore dignity through messages of faith, freedom, and personal responsibility. So that means it's very local, and the pastor is very, very much a part of our plan, because he's the one that's right there, boots on the ground in the neighborhoods that are hurting the most. He's the one that sees that 12-year-old walking down the street alone. He's the one that sees that 14-year-old getting ready to get in a gang. He's the one that sees that 18-year-old who's now living on the street corner because they emancipated outside of our foster system. So this work is very, very local. So if a pastor goes to urbancure.org and then writes a note, hey, I really want to know more about you. I want to know what it is you guys are doing. I want to come to your annual clergy conference. Then have that pastor do that. And they'll hear from Tim Lateef, who actually runs that part of our program. Reverend Lateef has done an excellent job to coordinate and organize a network of pastors all over the country that serve in our most vulnerable zip codes to help them figure out how to get rid of the welfare state and government dependency so that people can live free. That's what we want. So we work in 4 specific areas. 1, end abortion. We must end abortion. It's not only a crime against humanity, and it has moral implications and medical implications and mental implications, but it feeds a narrative that women don't have control over their sexual impulses. And if women lose control of their sexual impulses, then men won't marry them. And that's why marriage has collapsed, and our most vulnerable communities are just reeking with moral chaos, because marriage has stopped occurring, and therefore you got fatherless girls and boys, and we can speak an hour about what that looks like. So we need to make sure that these clergy that are coming into our network have a deep understanding that something has broken down after the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, to where we've taken this journey to government and it's not serving us well. So what we want to do is get government out of charity and get the churches back into charity work. And so that's what I would encourage your clergy that are interested to engage with us, get into our network, and they can start just by going to urbancure.org, which is or curepolicy.org. And then they will, if they put a note that says, I'm a clergy, I want to hear from you, they will hear from Reverend Tim Lateef.
Fantastic. Sis, we're going to end it there. And I am definitely going to do my part to make sure that far more, as many local ministers who might be interested do just that,
Yeah. Well, one thing you can do, Corbin, is just, we have an annual policy summit here in Washington, D.C. It's the end of September again. So if nothing else, just get them that information. They might want to just test the water. Some don't want to be on our list right away. They just want to hear us, see us, and they would get an invite from Tim to come up there and just check it out. This year, I think that one of the premier issues will be on homelessness. We've got to get to where we have that back under control as a society, because it is just not right now.
Right. Okay, sis, we'll definitely do that. Do that.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you again. I appreciate.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you now, ma'am, and we'll be in touch. Okay.
I love being with you. I think you're on my calendar once a month now, so I'll see you again next month.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. God bless you.
God bless you, ma'am.